David Mitchell looked me straight in the eye and said, "Hope you enjoy being homeless because I made sure you get nothing." The courthouse steps were slippery with November rain, but not as slippery as my son-in-law's smile when he thought he'd destroyed my life. 2 hours later, when the lawyer announced my new net worth, David fainted so hard he knocked over 3 chairs. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. But let me back up and tell you how a 67-year-old widow went from living in a storage unit to watching her daughter's widower collapse in a lawyer's office. Because honey, this story has more twists than a country road. And every single one of them was worth the ride. It started 6 months ago when my daughter Sarah lost her battle with cancer. 42 years old, beautiful as the day she was born. Gone in a way that still makes my heart feel like it's been ripped from my chest. I'd sold my house to help pay for her treatments, moved in with her family, and spent every day watching the light fade from my baby girl's eyes. David had been the perfect grieving husband during Sarah's illness. Tears at all the right moments, holding her hand during chemo, posting heartbreaking updates on social media that made everyone think he was husband of the year. I should have seen through the performance, but grief makes you stupid. Grief makes you miss the signs that someone is already calculating what they'll inherit. The funeral was beautiful. Sarah would have loved the white roses, the string quartet, the way the sunlight streamed through the church windows during the service. David sobbed at the podium talking about their eternal love, and how he'd never stop missing her. I sat in the front pew with my grandchildren Emma and Jake, holding their hands as we said goodbye to their mother. 2 weeks later, David knocked on my bedroom door at 7 a.m. I thought maybe he needed help with the kids' breakfast or wanted to talk about Sarah's things. Instead, he stood there with a cardboard box and the coldest expression I'd ever seen on a human face. "Maggie," he said, and I should have known something was wrong because he'd never called me Maggie before. It had always been Mom Thompson, said with respect and warmth. "I need you to pack your things, Cure. The kids and I need space to grieve, and your presence here is making it harder for us to move forward." I blinked at him, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry. What? You need to leave today. I've already spoken to Emma and Jake, and they understand this is what's best for the family." The words hit me like ice water. I'd given up my home, my independence, my security to be here for Sarah and the children. I had nowhere to go. No backup plan because family was supposed to be your backup plan. "David, I think you're still in shock from losing Sarah. Maybe we should talk about this when you've had more time to process everything." His laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm thinking clearer than I have in months. Sarah's gone, and frankly, I don't need a reminder of her walking around my house anymore. You look too much like her. It's depressing." That's when I knew my daughter had married a monster. Because no man who truly loved his wife would say something that cruel about her mother. No decent human being would take a grieving woman who'd sacrificed everything and throw her out like garbage. What about Emma and Jake? They just lost their mother. They need their grandmother. They need stability. Not an old woman crying in the hallway and burning dinner because she can't see through her tears. I packed my things in 30 minutes. 47 years of memories, photos, keepsakes from my life with Sarah's father. Everything that mattered to me fit into 4 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases. David stood in the doorway watching, checking his phone, impatient for me to be gone. Emma and Jake were at school. I would have said goodbye, but David made it clear I wasn't welcome to wait. As I loaded my car, I caught a glimpse of him through the kitchen window, already on the phone, probably telling whoever would listen how difficult I'd been, how he'd had no choice but to ask me to leave. That was 5 months ago. 5 months of living in a tiny studio apartment above Mrs. Chen's restaurant, surviving on Social Security, and the kindness of a landlady who charged me half the normal rent because she felt sorry for me. 5 months of eating ramen noodles and wondering how I'd become invisible to my own family. The hardest part wasn't the money or the cramped living space. It was the silence from my grandchildren. Emma and Jake had been the lights of my life since they were born. I'd babysat them every weekend, taught Emma to bake my famous chocolate chip cookies, helped Jake with his science projects. After David kicked me out, they stopped answering my calls. Their phones went straight to voicemail. My texts were ignored. I drove by their school once, hoping to catch a glimpse of them to make sure they were okay. Emma saw me from across the parking lot and turned away, grabbing Jake's arm and pulling him toward the building. The rejection cut deeper than David's cruelty because I knew it wasn't really coming from them. But here's the thing about being knocked down when you're 67 years old. You either stay down or you get up swinging. And Maggie Thompson didn't raise a quitter. She raised herself to be one. And it was time to remember that. That's when the call came about Sarah's will reading. I should have known something was off when Mr. Harrison, Sarah's lawyer, insisted on reading the will 6 months after the funeral. Most wills get handled within weeks, but he kept postponing, claiming there were complications with the estate that needed to be resolved. David had been frustrated by the delays, calling the lawyer's office weekly, demanding to know when he could access Sarah's assets. The night before the reading, I sat in my tiny apartment trying to decide what to wear. I owned exactly 3 outfits that weren't from Goodwill, and none of them seemed appropriate for watching my son-in-law inherit everything my daughter had owned. I settled on my navy dress, the one I'd worn to job interviews that never panned out, and my mother's pearl earrings. I arrived at Harrison & Associates at exactly 2 p.m. 15 minutes early because that's how my generation was raised. The law office was impressive in that old money way that makes you whisper automatically. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs that probably cost more than I spent on food in 3 months. Law books that looked like they'd been arranged by an interior designer rather than actually read. David was already there, sitting in the reception area like he owned the place. He'd brought a leather briefcase, which struck me as presumptuous since he wasn't inheriting business documents, just personal belongings. When he saw me, his expression shifted to that fake sympathy he'd mastered during Sarah's illness. "Maggie," he said, standing with theatrical concern, "how are you holding up? You look thin." I wanted to tell him that people tend to lose weight when they're eating cereal for dinner most nights, but instead I just smiled. "I'm managing, David. How are Emma and Jake?" His jaw tightened slightly. "They're doing well adjusting. It's been hard, but we're getting through it as a family. As a family without me." The message was crystal clear. Mr. Harrison emerged from his office promptly at 2 p.m. A distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes and an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Mitchell, thank you for coming. Please come in." His office was even more impressive than the reception area. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown, and his desk was massive enough to land a small aircraft. He gestured for us to sit in the chairs facing his desk, David immediately claiming the one closest to the window. "Before we begin," Mr. Harrison said, settling behind his desk, "I want to express my condolences again on Sarah's passing. She was a remarkable young woman, and her loss is felt by everyone who knew her." David nodded solemnly. I just gripped my purse tighter and tried not to think about my daughter's last words to me in the hospital. "Take care of my babies, Mom. Don't let them forget how much I love them." Some promises are impossible to keep when the other parent cuts you out of their lives completely. "Now then," Mr. Harrison continued, opening a thick folder. "Sarah's will is relatively straightforward, but there are some specific instructions she wanted followed. David, as her husband, you are named as the primary beneficiary for the house, her car, and her personal checking account." David leaned forward, pulling a pen from his briefcase like he was about to sign important documents. "What about the life insurance policy? That will be addressed momentarily. Sarah also left specific items to her children. Emma is to receive her grandmother's china set and her jewelry collection when she turns 18. Jake gets her book collection and the piano." I smiled at that. Sarah had been a voracious reader, just like her father, and she'd taught Jake to play piano from the time he was 5. These bequests showed how well she'd known her children, what would matter to them as they grew up. "And for you, Mrs. Thompson," Mr. Harrison said, looking directly at me. Sarah left her photo albums, her recipe collection, and a letter. My throat tightened with emotions I'd been holding back for 6 months. David shifted impatiently in his chair. "That's very touching," he said. "But can we discuss the financial assets, the life insurance, her retirement account, any investments?" Mr. Harrison's expression remained neutral. Of course, Sarah had a $150,000 life insurance policy through her employer. However, there was a beneficiary change made 6 weeks before her death. David's pen stopped moving. "A change? What kind of change?" "The policy was originally payable to you as her spouse. However, Sarah amended the beneficiary to her children with the funds to be held in trust until Emma reaches 25 and Jake reaches 23. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. David's face went white, then red, then an interesting shade of purple I'd never seen outside of a sunset. "That's impossible," he said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "Sarah never mentioned changing anything. She would have discussed that with me." "I have the signed documentation here," Mr. Harrison said calmly. Sarah was very specific about her wishes regarding her children's financial security. I watched David's hands shake as he tried to process this information. $150,000 gone. Money he'd probably already spent in his mind, maybe even started spending in reality. "This doesn't make sense," he said, standing abruptly. Sarah was sedated half the time toward the end. She wasn't thinking clearly. "This needs to be contested." Mr. Harrison remained seated, unruffled by David's outburst. "I can assure you that Sarah was completely lucid when she made this change. In fact, she specifically anticipated that there might be questions, which is why she asked me to document her mental state at the time. I have video testimony if needed." Video testimony. My heart swelled with pride for my daughter. Even dying, even weak and sick and fighting for every breath, she'd been thinking clearly enough to protect her children from a man she must have finally seen for what he truly was. David sat down heavily, his dreams of easy money crumbling around him. But I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He wasn't done fighting. "Fine," he said finally. "The insurance goes to the kids. I can live with that. But everything else comes to me as her surviving spouse." "Correct." "Yes." Mr. Harrison confirmed. "The house, car, and checking account are yours." David's smile returned, cold and calculating. "Good, because I've already made arrangements to sell the house. The kids and I are moving to Florida for a fresh start, and I want to be done with this whole mess." Sell the house. The house where Sarah had brought her babies home from the hospital, where she taught them to ride bikes in the driveway, where every room held memories of the family we'd been before cancer stole our happiness. He was going to erase all of it for money. "That concludes Sarah's will," Mr. Harrison said, but he made no move to close the folder. "However, there is one additional matter we need to discuss." David was already standing, probably planning his next mortgage payment or vacation. "Additional matter?" "Yes. You see, there's been another death in the family recently, one that affects both of you." I felt a chill of premonition. The only family member who'd been sick lately was my Aunt Rose, my father's sister, who'd been in a nursing home in Seattle for the past 10 years. I hadn't heard from her in months, but then again, I'd been a little busy watching my daughter die and becoming homeless. "What death?" David asked impatiently. Mr. Harrison looked directly at me. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm sorry to inform you that your Aunt Rose passed away 3 weeks ago. Her executive contacted our firm because you're named as her sole beneficiary." The world tilted sideways. Aunt Rose had been wealthy. Everyone knew that. But she'd never married, never had children, and I'd always assumed her money would go to charity. We'd exchanged Christmas cards for decades, but I couldn't even remember the last time we'd spoken on the phone. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "Rose barely knew me. According to her will, she'd been following your life from a distance for years. She knew about Sarah's illness, about your financial sacrifices, about your recent living situation, about David throwing me out." Heat flooded my cheeks with embarrassment, but Mr. Harrison's tone was matter-of-fact, not pitying. David had frozen in place, his briefcase forgotten. "How much money are we talking about here?" Mr. Harrison opened a second folder, this one even thicker than the first. Rose Aberdeen owned considerable real estate holdings, stocks, bonds, and other investments. The total estate after taxes and fees comes to approximately $2.3 million. The silence in the room was deafening. I couldn't breathe. $2.3 million, enough to buy 10 houses like the one David was planning to sell. Enough to secure my future and my grandchildren's educations, and still have money left over to help other families facing medical bankruptcies. David's face had gone from purple to gray. "That money should be part of Sarah's estate," he said desperately. "Family inheritance should flow through marriage lines." "I'm afraid inheritance law doesn't work that way," Mr. Harrison said with what might have been the tiniest hint of satisfaction. Rose Aberdeen left her money specifically to Margaret Thompson with very detailed instructions about why. He handed me an envelope with my name written in spidery handwriting I recognized from decades of Christmas cards. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in the same careful script. My dear Maggie, it read, by the time you read this, I'll be gone and you'll be wondering why a crazy old lady you barely knew left you a fortune. The truth is, I've been watching your life for years through Sarah's Christmas letters and Facebook posts. I saw how you loved your family, how you sacrificed for them, how you gave up everything to care for your daughter in her final months. I also know that David Mitchell threw you out of your home after Sarah's funeral, leaving you with nothing but grief and a broken heart. Consider this money my way of evening the score. Use it wisely. Help those children when they're old enough to understand who really loves them. And remember that sometimes the universe has a sense of justice. After all, you've earned every penny of this inheritance through your kindness, your strength, and your grace in the face of cruelty. Now go show that worthless son-in-law what happens when you mess with a Thompson woman. Love, Aunt Rose. When I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. David was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. Pure undiluted fear. Because suddenly, the powerless old woman he'd discarded like trash was the one holding all the cards. David's transformation from smugly confident to desperately calculating happened faster than a summer storm. Before I could even process Aunt Rose's letter, he was sliding his chair closer to mine, his voice taking on that honeyed tone I remembered from Sarah's courtship years. Maggie, this is incredible news, he said, reaching over to pat my hand like we were old friends. Sarah would be so happy to know that her mother is financially secure. This takes such a weight off all of our shoulders. I pulled my hand away and folded Aunt Rose's letter carefully. 20 minutes ago, this man had been calculating how quickly he could cash Sarah's life insurance check. Now, he was acting like my sudden wealth was something that affected him personally. I'm still processing this myself, David, I said quietly. Of course. It's overwhelming. His smile was so bright, it could have powered a small city. But this is wonderful for the children too. I mean, with your resources and mine combined, we can really make sure Emma and Jake have everything they need combined. There it was. He was already figuring out how to get his hands on my inheritance. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. Mrs. Thompson, there are some documents you'll need to sign, and I'll need to schedule an appointment to discuss the various accounts and properties you've inherited. It's quite complex. Properties? I asked. Rose owned a beachfront cottage in Maine, a downtown Seattle condo, and 3 rental properties in Portland. Plus, there's the stock portfolio, several CDs, and a money market account. You'll want to work with a financial advisor to develop a management strategy. David was practically vibrating with excitement. Maggie, you should come home with us tonight. We need to celebrate as a family, and there's so much to discuss. The kids will be thrilled to see you. 6 months ago, I would have believed him. 6 months ago, I would have thought the money had somehow made me worthy of love again. But living on ramen noodles in silence teaches you to recognize hungry wolves even when they're wearing sheep's clothing. That's very kind, David, but I think I need some time to let this sink in. Nonsense, he said, standing and extending his hand like he expected me to take it. Your family. This is exactly the kind of news that brings families together. I remained seated. Funny how money does that. His smile flickered for just a moment. What do you mean? 6 months ago, I was a depressing reminder who needed to be removed from your house for the children's emotional well-being. Today I'm family again. The only thing that changed was my bank balance. Mr. Harrison was watching this exchange with the fascination of someone witnessing a chess match between a master and someone who just learned the rules. David's face cycled through several emotions before settling on wounded innocence. Maggie, I think you misunderstood my position back then. We were all grieving, making decisions that seemed right at the time but maybe weren't ideal. I've regretted asking you to leave from the moment you drove away. Have you? I stood up, gathering my purse. Because when I called last Christmas to talk to Emma and Jake, you told me they were too busy to come to the phone. When I sent birthday presents, they were returned unopened. When I showed up at Jake's baseball game 3 months ago, you told the security guard I was harassing your family. Each fact I recited made his expression tighter. He'd probably forgotten half of these incidents, dismissing them as easily as he'd dismissed me. There were misunderstandings, he said weakly. No, David, there was cruelty. Deliberate, calculated cruelty designed to erase me from my grandchildren's lives so completely that they'd forget I ever mattered to them. Mr. Harrison stepped in smoothly. Mrs. Thompson, shall we schedule a time for you to come back and handle the inheritance paperwork? Perhaps next week when you've had time to process everything. That would be perfect, I said, grateful for the interruption. Thank you for everything, Mr. Harrison. David followed me to the elevator, his desperation becoming more obvious with each step. Maggie, please don't leave angry. Sarah wouldn't want this between us. She'd want us to come together for the children's sake. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. You know what Sarah wanted, David? She wanted her children to know their grandmother loved them. She wanted them to have stability and security and family connections that would last their whole lives. Instead, you taught them that love is conditional, that family can be discarded when it becomes inconvenient. That's not fair, he protested as the doors started to close. Neither was throwing out a grieving woman with nowhere to go, I replied. But life has a funny way of balancing the scales. The last thing I saw before the elevator doors shut completely was David's face, pale and desperate, as he realized that the powerless woman he'd discarded was now the one person who could change his children's futures. I drove home to my tiny apartment in a daze, my mind reeling with numbers that seemed too large to be real. $2.3 million. Enough money to buy dignity, security, choices. Enough money to make David Mitchell very, very sorry he'd ever underestimated Maggie Thompson. But first, I needed to figure out what kind of woman I wanted to be with this power. Because Aunt Rose was right about one thing. The universe did have a sense of justice. The question was what I planned to do with it. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. the next morning. I ignored it. Then it rang again at 6:15, 6:30, and 6:45. By the time it rang for the fifth time at 7 a.m., I was awake anyway, so I answered without checking the caller ID. Grandma Maggie. Emma's voice was tentative, smaller than I remembered. Dad said, he said, you inherited some money? My heart broke and soared simultaneously. After 6 months of silence, my granddaughter was calling me, even if it was about money. Hello, sweetheart, I said, sitting up in bed. Yes, my great-aunt Rose left me quite a surprise. How are you? How's school? I'm fine. Dad wants to know if you could come for dinner tonight. He said we need to talk as a family about your situation. My situation? David was already coaching her on how to approach me, probably filling her head with ideas about how wonderful it would be if Grandma came home now that she could contribute financially to the household. I'd love to see you, Emma, but I'm not sure about dinner. Your father and I have some things we need to work out first. He said you were angry about some misunderstanding from before, but that families should forgive each other. Her voice had that rehearsed quality that told me she was repeating David's words verbatim. What do you think about that? I asked carefully. There was a long pause. I missed you at my birthday party, she said finally, so quietly I almost didn't hear her. I looked for you, but Dad said you were too busy to come. I closed my eyes, fury and sadness roaring in my chest. David had told me Emma didn't want to see me. He told Emma I was too busy to see her. The lies went both ways, designed to keep us apart and break the bond between us. I wanted to be there more than anything, I said. I wasn't too busy. I wasn't invited. Oh, another long pause. Dad says you might help pay for my college now. And there it was. David had already started the campaign, making sure the children understood that my worth was tied to my ability to finance their futures. It was manipulative and disgusting, but also revealing. He was scared enough to show his hand this early, which meant he knew he was in a weak position. Emma, can you do something for me? Can you tell your father that I'll consider having dinner with the family, but only if he and I talk privately first? Just the two of us. Okay. He's going to ask what you want to talk about. Tell him I want to discuss the past 6 months. All of it. And Emma, I love you and your brother more than you'll ever know. That hasn't changed, no matter what anyone has told you. Her voice was thick with tears when she responded. I love you too, Grandma. After she hung up, I sat in my tiny kitchen drinking coffee and planning my strategy. Because make no mistake, this was war now. David had used my grandchildren as weapons against me, turning them into unwitting soldiers in his campaign to erase my presence from their lives. But now I had resources he desperately needed. And it was time to negotiate from a position of strength. My phone rang again at 10 a.m. David this time, his voice carefully controlled. "Maggie, Emma said you want to talk privately before coming to dinner." "Of course, I think that's wise. We have a lot to discuss." "Yes, we do, but not at your house." "Why? Meet me at Giovanni's restaurant on Main Street at noon." "We'll talk there." I chose Giovanni's deliberately. It was public enough that David couldn't lose his temper completely, but intimate enough for serious conversation. More importantly, it was where he'd taken Sarah on their first official date 15 years ago. If he had any residual conscience about how he'd treated his wife's mother, maybe the location would remind him. I arrived first and chose a corner table where we could talk without being overheard. David walked in 5 minutes later, and I had to suppress a smile at his appearance. He dressed up for this lunch, wearing his best suit and a tie that screamed, "Trustworthy family man." He'd even gotten a haircut since yesterday. "You look wonderful, Maggie," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek like we were beloved family members reuniting. "I'm so happy we're doing this." I let him order wine and make small talk about the weather until our food arrived. Then I set down my fork and looked him directly in the eye. "Tell me about the life insurance money, David." He nearly choked on his pasta. "What about it? You seem surprised that Sarah had changed the beneficiary to the children. When did you last look at her policy?" His Adam's apple bobbed nervously. "I don't remember exactly. We didn't discuss financial details much during her illness." "That's interesting because according to the insurance company, you called them 4 times in the month before Sarah died asking about claim procedures and payout timelines." The blood drained from his face. "How do you know that?" "I called them yesterday. Beneficiaries have access to certain information, and since the money is going to Emma and Jake, they were very helpful." This was a complete lie. I had no access to insurance records. But David didn't know that, and his reaction told me everything I needed to know. "I was just trying to plan ahead," he said weakly. "I knew there would be expenses after Sarah passed." "Expenses like what?" "You kept our daughter's medical insurance active until the very end. The house is paid off thanks to my money. What expenses were so pressing that you needed to call about life insurance payouts while your wife was still alive?" He stared at his plate, probably running calculations in his head about how much trouble he was in. "I made some financial mistakes. I thought the insurance money would help me fix them." "What kind of mistakes?" The silence stretched between us. Finally, he looked up with the expression of a man who'd been backed into a corner with no way out. "I borrowed against Sarah's retirement account without telling her. When she got sick and couldn't work, I couldn't make the payments back. I thought the life insurance would cover it." My stomach turned. While Sarah was fighting for her life, worried sick about medical bills and her children's futures, David had been stealing from her retirement fund. Money she'd saved for decades gone to cover his financial mistakes. "How much did you take?" $60,000. I set down my water glass carefully, afraid I might throw it otherwise. "What did you spend $60,000 on?" "Some investments that didn't work out. A business opportunity that fell through. Look, it wasn't supposed to be permanent. I was going to pay it back with money from your wife's life insurance policy." "I never wanted Sarah to die," he said quickly. "You have to believe that." But when it became clear that she wasn't going to recover, I had to think practically about the future. Practically. While I was sleeping on a cot next to my daughter's hospital bed, while I was selling my house to pay for experimental treatments, while I was watching the love of my life waste away to nothing, David was thinking practically about how much money her death would bring him. "And then you found out the insurance was going to the children instead." He nodded miserably. "Sarah must have suspected something. She never said anything to me, but she must have known." Of course Sarah had known. My brilliant, intuitive daughter had figured out what kind of man she'd married and protected her children's inheritance from him. Even dying, she'd been 10 steps ahead of her husband's greed. "So when you kicked me out of the house," I said slowly, "it wasn't because my presence was making it hard for you to grieve. It was because you needed to sell the house to cover the money you'd stolen from Sarah's retirement account." "Partly, yes. And you cut me off from Emma and Jake because you were afraid I'd figure out what you'd done. I was trying to protect them from family drama while they were grieving their mother." "You were protecting yourself." I leaned forward. "Tell me, David, what happens when the retirement account company realizes the money is missing?" When they start asking questions about unauthorized withdrawals, his face went white. I'll pay it back. With what money? You just told me your investments failed and your business opportunity fell through. The house sale might cover it, but then what? How do you support your children? He stared at me across the table, and I could see the exact moment when he realized why I'd wanted this private conversation. This wasn't just about the past 6 months. This was about the future. His future. His children's future. All of it suddenly dependent on the goodwill of the woman he'd thrown away like garbage. I'll figure it out, he said finally. Will you? I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. These are printouts of public records. Your mortgage payments have been late 4 times in the past 6 months. You've maxed out 3 credit cards. Your car payment is overdue. You're not figuring anything out, David. You're drowning. I stood up and put on my coat. Dinner with my grandchildren tonight sounds lovely. Pick me up at 6. And David, we're going to discuss some new family arrangements because things are about to change dramatically around here. I left him sitting at the table staring at the evidence of his financial collapse, finally understanding that the old woman he discarded now held his entire future in her hands. This David picked me up at exactly 6 o'clock driving Sarah's car, because his truck was apparently having transmission problems. He couldn't afford to fix. He changed into jeans and a sweater, abandoning the business suit for something more family dinner appropriate. His smile was strained and his knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel. The kids are really excited to see you, he said as we pulled into his driveway. I explained that there had been some miscommunication between us and we're working things out now. Miscommunication, that was what he was calling 6 months of deliberate cruelty and isolation. How much did you tell them about your financial situation? I asked, his jaw tightened. I didn't want to worry them with adult problems. So they don't know you've been stealing from their mother's retirement account. Could you please not put it like that? He snapped, then immediately softened his tone. Look, I made mistakes, but I'm handling it. Tonight should be about family, about moving forward together. The house looked exactly the same from the outside, but walking through the front door felt like entering a museum exhibit titled Life Before Everything Fell Apart. Sarah's pictures were still on the mantel. Her coffee mug still sat in the kitchen sink. Her reading glasses were still folded on the end table next to her favorite chair. David had preserved everything like a shrine, which might have seemed touching if I didn't know he was probably too broke to redecorate. Emma appeared from the kitchen, taller than I remembered, her dark hair pulled back in Sarah's signature ponytail style. She hesitated for a moment, then threw her arms around me in a hug that felt like coming home. I missed you so much, Grandma, she whispered. I missed you too, sweetheart. More than you know. Jake wandered in from the family room, 15 now, and all arms and legs like a young colt. He'd grown at least 3 in since I'd last seen him, but his smile was the same shy, sweet expression that had melted my heart since he was a toddler. Hey, Grandma Maggie, he said, accepting my hug with the awkward grace of a teenager who still loved his grandmother, but wasn't sure how to show it. How's baseball season going? I asked. Pretty good. I made varsity this year. Vop? That's incredible. His face lit up with pride. Coach says I might get a scholarship if I keep improving. David bustled around the kitchen, pulling plates from cabinets and talking nonstop about how wonderful it was to have the family together again. But I watched my grandchildren carefully, and what I saw broke my heart. They were walking on eggshells around their father, quick to agree with everything he said, careful not to make noise or mess. The easy, chaotic warmth that had filled this house when Sarah was alive had been replaced by the tense quiet of children afraid to disturb an unstable adult. Over dinner, David launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech about family values, forgiveness, and second chances. The children listened politely, but Emma kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. So, David said finally, setting down his fork with dramatic emphasis, I've been thinking about Grandma Maggie's new situation, and I believe it presents some wonderful opportunities for all of us. What kind of opportunities? Emma asked carefully. Well, with Grandma's inheritance, we could really plan for your futures properly. College funds, maybe a family vacation to help us heal from losing Mom. Some improvements to the house. I watched him spin his web, turning my inheritance into a family asset that he obviously intended to help manage. Emma and Jake were looking at me expectantly, and I realized this was my moment to either play along with David's fantasy or shatter it completely. Actually, I said I wanted to talk to you both about some changes that are going to happen. David's smile faltered. Changes? Emma, Jake, do you remember when I lived here before your mom died? How we used to bake together and work on homework and watch movies on Friday nights. They both nodded, their faces brightening at the memory. I want you to know that I didn't choose to leave. I was asked to leave, and I've been waiting all these months for a chance to be part of your lives again. David cleared his throat loudly. Maggie, I think we agreed to move forward, not rehash old misunderstandings. These weren't misunderstandings, David, and the children deserve to know the truth. I turned back to Emma and Jake. Your father told me you didn't want to see me anymore. He told you I was too busy to see you. Neither of those things was true. Emma's face went very still. What do you mean? I mean, I've been calling, texting, and sending presents that were returned. I've been showing up at your school events only to be told I was unwelcome. I've been living in a tiny apartment above a restaurant, missing you every single day and wondering why you'd stop loving me. We never stopped loving you, Jake said quietly. Dad said you needed space to grieve and that you'd call when you were ready. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the pieces clicking together in Emma's mind. The intelligent girl who'd inherited her mother's sharp instincts, finally understanding how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. So, she said slowly, when I asked why Grandma didn't come to my birthday party, and you said she was busy, she was standing outside the fence at your softball game 3 months ago, I said gently. But your father told security she was bothering the family. Emma's face crumpled. Dad, is that true? David was trapped and he knew it. He could lie, but Emma was old enough now to fact-check his stories. He could tell the truth, but that would expose him as the manipulator he'd become. He chose a middle path that satisfied no one. I was trying to protect you from adult complications, he said. Your grandmother and I had some disagreements about what was best for the family, and I thought it would be easier if we worked them out privately by cutting me off from my grandchildren for 6 months. I asked by making them think I'd abandoned them. That wasn't my intention. Emma stood up abruptly. I need some air, she said and walked out onto the back deck. Jake followed her, leaving David and me alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a family dinner that had blown up faster than either of us had anticipated. You didn't have to do that, David said quietly. Yes, I did. Those children have been living with lies for months. They deserve to know why their grandmother disappeared from their lives and what happens now. You've got the money. You've got the moral high ground. You've turned my kids against me. What's your endgame here? I looked around the kitchen where I'd helped Sarah learn to cook, where I'd bandaged scraped knees and listened to homework complaints and watched my grandchildren grow up. This house held the best memories of my life, but it also held the worst 6 months. My endgame, I said, is making sure Emma and Jake have the stability and security their mother wanted for them with or without you. His face went pale. What does that mean? Through the window, I could see my grandchildren sitting on the deck steps, talking in low voices, probably trying to process the truth about their father's lies and their grandmother's disappearance. It means, I said, that we need to have a very different conversation about the future. Because the old David who could throw away inconvenient family members doesn't exist anymore. The new David needs to prove he deserves to be part of his children's lives. I left him sitting at the kitchen table and went outside to talk to Emma and Jake because whatever happened next, they were going to be part of the decision-making process. They'd been manipulated and lied to for long enough. It was time they learned what having real power felt like. Emma was crying when I found her on the deck, but they were angry tears, not sad ones. Jake sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that reminded me so much of Sarah. It took my breath away. Is Dad in financial trouble? Emma asked without preamble. Because weird things have been happening, and now with what you said about him needing your money. I sat down on the step below them. What kind of weird things? The electricity got turned off last month, Jake said. Dad said it was a mistake by the power company, but they made him pay a bunch of money before they'd turn it back on. And he's been working extra shifts at the construction site, even weekends. Emma added, he said it was to save money for our college funds, but if Mom had a retirement account, these children were too smart for their own good. Or maybe they were exactly as smart as they needed to be to survive a parent who'd been lying to them for months. Your father made some financial mistakes, I said carefully. He's trying to fix them, but it's complicated. Did he steal Mom's money? Emma asked directly. The question hung in the air between us. I could lie, protect David's image as their father, maintain the fiction that adults always made good choices, or I could trust these children with the truth and let them start making informed decisions about their own lives. He borrowed money from her retirement account without permission, I said finally. He was hoping to pay it back, but his investments didn't work out. Emma's tears stopped. Her face went very calm, very still, in a way that reminded me of Sarah when she was furious. So he stole from Mom while she was dying. And then he kicked you out because he was afraid you'd find out. Emma, I started. No, it makes sense now. Why he's been so weird about money. Why he freaked out when Mom's life insurance went to us instead of him. Why he suddenly wants to be best friends with you again. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. How much money did Mom leave us? $150,000 split between you and Jake. Jake whistled softly. That's a lot. It's enough for college, Emma said. It's enough that we don't have to depend on Dad for everything. The calculating tone in her voice worried me. 16 was too young to be thinking about financial independence from your only living parent. But David had forced this situation by his own choices. What are you thinking, sweetheart? Emma looked at me with eyes that were far too old for her face. I'm thinking that we have options now. Real options. And I'm thinking that Dad has been making decisions for us without asking what we wanted. Like what? Like moving to Florida. Jake said he's been talking about it since Mom died, saying we need a fresh start away from memories. But this is where Mom lived. This is where our friends are, where we go to school. I don't want to move to Florida, Emma said firmly. I want to graduate from Jefferson High where Mom went. I want to go to Mom's grave whenever I need to talk to her. I want to keep living in the house where she raised us. But if your father can't afford the house payments, then maybe he shouldn't be the one making decisions about where we live, Emma said. The words hit me like a physical blow. This child was talking about choosing between her inheritance and her father, between financial security and family loyalty. It was a choice number 16-year-old should have to make. But David's lies and financial irresponsibility had created this impossible situation. Emma, I know you're angry, but your father loves you. He's made mistakes, but he's still your dad. Is he? She asked bitterly. Because a real father wouldn't lie to us for months about why our grandmother disappeared. A real father wouldn't steal from our college funds. A real father would put our needs before his pride. Through the glass door, I could see David pacing in the kitchen, probably trying to figure out how to salvage this disaster. He'd played his hand too early, gotten greedy, and now he was facing a rebellion he'd never anticipated. What do you want to happen? I asked quietly. Emma and Jake exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They'd obviously discussed this possibility before tonight. We want to live with you, Jake said. At least until we graduate. We want to stay in our schools, keep our friends, visit Mom's grave. We want to be with someone who actually wants us around. My heart broke and healed simultaneously. These children were choosing me over their father, choosing stability over blood, choosing honesty over convenience. It was exactly what I dreamed of for 6 months, but not like this. Never like this. That's a big decision, I said. And it's not just up to us. Your father has legal custody. He won't fight it, Emma said with certainty. Not if the alternative is us telling a judge about the stolen money and the lies. You can't blackmail your father into letting you go. Why not? She asked. He blackmailed us into staying by lying about you for months. At least our way, everybody gets what they want. What does your father want? Money, Jake said simply. He wants your inheritance to solve his problems. But he wants it without having to actually take responsibility for what he's done. These children saw their father more clearly than I had given them credit for. They understood that David's sudden affection for me was entirely financial, that his promises to work things out were dependent on my willingness to bail him out of his self-created disasters. If you lived with me, I said slowly, what would happen to your father? He'd figure it out, Emma said. He's an adult. It's time he started acting like one. The back door opened and David stepped outside. His face was carefully composed, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He'd probably been listening to our conversation, realizing that his children were slipping away from him just as surely as my money was. "How's everyone doing out here?" he asked with forced cheer. Emma stood up and faced him directly. "We want to live with Grandma Maggie." David's smile faltered. That's a big decision to make when emotions are running high. "Maybe we should all sleep on it and talk more tomorrow." "I've been sleeping on it for months," Emma said. "Every night since you told us Grandma was too busy to see us, I've been wondering why she stopped caring about us. Now I know she never did." "Sweetheart, you're upset about some miscommunications between your grandmother and me. But that doesn't mean we should make drastic changes to our family structure. Our family structure is already broken. Dad, you broke it when you lied to us. You broke it when you stole from Mom's account. You broke it when you threw away the one person who actually wanted to take care of us." David looked at me desperately. "Maggie, please tell them this isn't a good idea. Tell them family should stay together." I looked at my son-in-law, this man who'd stolen from his dying wife, who'd manipulated children who were grieving their mother, who'd thrown me away like garbage and was now begging me to save him from the consequences of his own choices. "Families should stay together," I agreed. "But some families need to be rebuilt before they can function properly." "What does that mean?" Emma answered for me. "It means you have some serious changes to make before we can trust you again." David stared at his daughter, probably seeing Sarah's stubborn determination in her face. Realizing that the child he'd been manipulating had grown into someone who wouldn't be controlled. "What kind of changes?" he asked quietly. And that was when I knew we had him. Because a man who was truly confident in his parenting wouldn't need to ask his 16-year-old daughter what he needed to change. A good father would know. But David Mitchell wasn't a good father. He was a desperate man who'd painted himself into a corner. And now he was ready to negotiate his way out. The question was whether Emma and Jake were old enough to handle the power they'd suddenly found themselves wielding. The negotiation took place around Sarah's kitchen table, the same table where we'd planned her treatment schedules and discussed her funeral arrangements. It felt fitting somehow that this conversation about the children's future was happening in the space where their mother had made so many decisions about their welfare. David sat across from Emma and Jake, looking like a defendant facing a jury. I positioned myself at the head of the table, not quite neutral, but not completely aligned with either side. The children needed an advocate, but they also needed to understand that choices had consequences for everyone. "Okay," David said, his voice carefully controlled. "Tell me what you want." Emma had clearly been thinking about this for longer than just tonight. She pulled out a piece of paper covered with her neat handwriting. "First, we want the truth about everything. No more lies about money, about Grandma, about why you make the decisions you make." David nodded reluctantly. "Okay. Second, we want to stay in this house and finish school here. No moving to Florida or anywhere else without our agreement." "The house payments," David started, "can be covered if you get help from people who care about us," Jake interrupted. "But only if you prove you can be trusted with that help." Smart boy. He was learning that financial dependence could flow in both directions. "Third," Emma continued, "we want regular time with Grandma Maggie. Not just when you need something from her, but because she's our family and we love her." "That's fair," David said. "Fourth, you get counseling. Real counseling, not just a couple sessions to make us happy. You need to figure out why you thought it was okay to lie to us about everything." David's jaw tightened. "I don't need a therapist to tell me how to raise my children." "You need something," Emma said firmly. "Because what you've been doing isn't working." I watched this exchange with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Emma was advocating for herself and her brother with a maturity that should have been unnecessary at 16. But David's lies had forced her to grow up too fast, to become her own protector when the adult who should have been protecting her had failed. "What happens if I agree to all of this?" David asked. Emma looked at me and I realized she was asking for backup. These children were strong, but they were still children. They needed an adult to help them navigate the complex territory they'd entered. "If you agree," I said slowly, "the work together to create a family structure that actually serves Emma and Jake's best interests. That might mean financial support. It might mean shared custody arrangements. It might mean counseling for all of us to repair the damage that's been done. And if I don't agree, then Emma and Jake move in with me. You continue struggling to manage your financial problems alone, and we let a judge decide what's best for the children." The silence stretched between us. David was doing the math, calculating whether he could afford to lose both his children's daily presence and any hope of accessing my inheritance to solve his problems. The money from Sarah's retirement account, he said finally. If I pay it back, does that fix things? It's a start, Emma said. But trust isn't just about money, Dad. It's about honesty. It's about admitting when you're wrong and actually changing your behavior. I never meant for things to get this complicated, David said quietly. But they did get complicated, Jake said. And then you made them worse by lying to us instead of just asking for help. I looked at my grandson, remembering the shy 10-year-old who used to hide behind his mother's legs when strangers visited. Grief and betrayal had taught him to speak up for himself in ways that broke my heart. David, I said, what would you have done 6 months ago if I had knocked on your door and offered to help with your financial problems? Not as a desperate woman you could throw away, but as Sarah's mother who wanted to support her grandchildren. He stared at the table. I would have been too proud to accept help. And now I don't have a choice. You always had choices, Emma said. You just made bad ones. The truth of that statement hung in the air. David had chosen to steal from Sarah's retirement account instead of asking for help. He had chosen to lie to his children instead of admitting his mistakes. He had chosen to throw me away instead of accepting that family meant interdependence, not just convenience. So what happens now? He asked. I reached into my purse and pulled out a business card. Tomorrow morning you call this financial advisor. We're going to set up a structure that pays back Sarah's retirement account, covers the house payments, and establishes college funds for Emma and Jake. And in return, you prove that you can be the kind of father Sarah wanted for her children. You get counseling. You rebuild trust with your kids. And you accept that being part of this family means respecting all of its members, including you, including me. David took the business card and stared at it like it was either a lifeline or a death sentence. What if I mess up again? Then you lose your children, Emma said simply. For real this time, not just temporarily. The bluntness of her statement seemed to shock him. He looked at his daughter as if seeing her clearly for the first time, recognizing that the compliant child he'd been manipulating had become someone who wouldn't tolerate being manipulated anymore. I'll try, he said finally. Trying isn't enough, Jake said. Mom used to say that trying is just an excuse for not doing. More of Sarah's wisdom preserved in her son's memory, and deployed at exactly the right moment. My daughter had raised these children well, giving them the tools they needed to navigate even this impossible situation. Okay, David said. I'll do it. All of it. The counseling, the financial restructuring, the honesty. I'll do whatever it takes to keep my family together. Emma and Jake exchanged a look, and I could see them making a silent decision. We'll give you 6 months, Emma said. 6 months to prove that you can be the dad we need instead of the dad you've been. And we're living with Grandma Maggie during those 6 months, Jake added. So, we can see how much you really change when you're not performing for an audience every day. The terms were harsh but fair. David would have to rebuild his relationship with his children from scratch, prove his trustworthiness through actions rather than words, and accept financial dependence on the woman he discarded as worthless. It was exactly the kind of justice Aunt Rose would have appreciated. 6 months, David agreed quietly. As I looked around the table at these 3 people who'd been torn apart by lies and brought back together by necessity, I realized that sometimes the best families aren't the ones that never break. They're the ones that figure out how to heal stronger than they were before. But first, we all had to survive the rebuilding process. Moving my grandchildren into my tiny apartment was like trying to fit a symphony orchestra into a phone booth. Emma took one look at the space above Mrs. Chen's restaurant and announced that this was obviously temporary. We'd need to find something bigger immediately. She wasn't wrong. The apartment had seemed adequate for a grieving woman who expected to live alone for the rest of her life. For a family of 3, it was claustrophobic. The good news, I told them as we surveyed the cramped quarters, is that we can afford something better now. How much better? Jake asked, setting his duffel bag on the tiny kitchen table. Well, let's just say Aunt Rose was very generous. I decided to tell them about the inheritance gradually. The full amount was overwhelming. Even for me, for teenagers who've been living with financial uncertainty for months. It might be too much to process all at once. That first weekend we went house hunting. Not in the expensive neighborhoods where David's house was located, but in the older part of town where Sarah had grown up, where the houses had character and the yards were big enough for gardens and family barbecues. "I want a house with a porch," Emma declared as we walked through our third showing of the day. "Mom always said she wanted a house with a big front porch where she could drink coffee in the mornings. And a 2-car garage," Jake added. "For when I get my license and space for a vegetable garden," I said, thinking about Aunt Rose's letter encouraging me to use the money wisely. We found it on Maple Street, 3 blocks from Sarah's childhood home. A 1920s craftsman with a wraparound porch, original hardwood floors, and enough bedrooms that Emma and Jake could each have their own space. The backyard was perfect for a garden, and the kitchen had a breakfast nook where morning coffee would taste like possibilities instead of regret. "It's perfect," Emma breathed, standing in the living room with sunlight streaming through the tall windows. "It's expensive," I said, though not nearly as expensive as it would have been 6 months ago. "Can we afford it?" Jake asked. I thought about Aunt Rose, about her desire to even the score for all the kindness I'd shown and cruelty I'd endured. "Yes, sweetheart. We can afford it." The paperwork took 2 weeks to finalize. During that time, Emma and Jake settled into their new school routines, and I started the process of untangling David's financial mess. The meeting with my financial advisor revealed the full scope of his problems, and it was worse than I'd anticipated. "He's not just behind on the retirement account repayment," Mrs. Patterson explained, spreading documents across her conference table. "He's carrying significant credit card debt. His truck is about to be repossessed, and he's 3 months behind on property taxes for the house." "How much total debt?" "Nearly $90,000. Not including the money taken from Sarah's account." Emma whistled softly. She'd insisted on being included in these meetings, arguing that since her future was being discussed, she deserved to know the details. "So he really was desperate," she said thoughtfully. "Desperation doesn't excuse lying to your children," I pointed out. "No, but it explains it." She was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the same analytical approach Sarah had always used for complex problems. "If we pay off all his debts, what happens then?" Mrs. Patterson looked at me questioningly. We hadn't discussed the possibility of clearing David's debts entirely, just restructuring them to make them manageable. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I mean, if we eliminate all the financial pressure, what's his excuse for lying to us going forward? If he messes up after that, we know it's about his character, not about being scared and overwhelmed." The wisdom in this approach took my breath away. Emma was proposing to remove all external stressors, so she could evaluate her father's true nature, without the complication of financial desperation. "That would cost approximately $90,000, Mrs. Patterson said carefully, "plus whatever it takes to pay back Mom's retirement account. Another $60,000. Emma looked at me steadily. "Can we afford it?" I thought about Aunt Rose's letter again, about her instruction to help my grandchildren when they were old enough to understand who really loved them. This wasn't just about money. This was about giving these children the gift of clarity, of knowing once and for all whether their father could be trusted with their hearts. "Yes," I said, "we can afford it." The look on David's face when I presented him with cashier's checks totaling $150,000 was worth every penny. He stared at the checks like they might disappear if he breathed on them wrong. "I don't understand," he said. "Why would you pay off all my debts?" "I'm not doing this for you," I told him bluntly. "I'm doing this for Emma and Jake. They need to know whether your problems were caused by financial stress or by fundamental character flaws." "And now I'll find out," Emma said from her position by the window. She'd insisted on being present for this conversation too. "The slate is clean, Dad. No more excuses. No more desperate circumstances. No more reasons to lie to us about anything. From now on, every choice you make is just about what kind of person you want to be." David's hand shook as he held the checks. "This is too much. I can't accept this much help." "You're not accepting it," Jake said quietly. "It's being given to your children's future, and you just happen to benefit from it. What happens if I take this money and things still don't work out between us?" Emma and I exchanged glances. We discussed this possibility extensively. "Then you keep the money," Emma said. "But we're done trying to have a relationship with you. This is your last chance to prove that you can be the father we need." "No pressure," David said weakly. "Actually, lots of pressure," Emma corrected. We're betting $150,000 that you're capable of becoming someone we can trust again. Don't make us lose that bet. After David left with his checks and his new mortgage on proving his worthiness, Emma and I sat in our new kitchen drinking coffee and watching Jake shoot baskets in the backyard. Do you think he'll change? She asked. I don't know, but now we'll find out who he really is underneath all the financial stress and lies. And if he doesn't change, then you and Jake will know that you tried everything possible to save the relationship. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is give someone enough rope to either climb out of their hole or hang themselves with it. Emma was quiet for a long time, watching her brother practice his free throws. Mom would have liked this house, she said finally. Yes, she would have. She would have liked knowing that we have choices now, that we're not stuck depending on people who don't value us. Your mother always wanted you to have choices. That's why she changed her life insurance beneficiary. Why she protected your inheritance. She knew that financial independence equals freedom. Is that why Aunt Rose left you all that money? To give you freedom? I smiled, thinking about a woman I'd barely known who'd understood my situation better than family members I'd lived with for years. I think she wanted to prove that kindness matters, that people who throw away good things eventually realize what they've lost. Well, Emma said, Emma raising her coffee cup in a mock toast. Here's to Aunt Rose and her sense of justice. And here's to your mother who raised children strong enough to demand the respect they deserve. We sat there in our beautiful new kitchen, surrounded by the security that money could buy and the peace that comes from making decisions based on self-respect rather than desperation. Outside, Jake made 3 free throws in a row, pumping his fist in triumph. Inside, 2 generations of Thompson women watched him celebrate and felt something we hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. 3 months into our experiment, David was exceeding everyone's expectations except his own. He'd started therapy with a counselor who specialized in grief and financial trauma. He'd taken a financial management class that taught him to budget, save, and plan for emergencies. He'd even joined a support group for single parents where he was learning that his struggles weren't unique or unmanageable. Most importantly, he'd stopped lying. I screwed up dinner tonight, he told Emma when she called to check on him. Burned the chicken, forgot to buy vegetables, ended up eating cereal for the 3rd time this week. Dad, Emma said patiently, you know you can ask for help with stuff like that, right? I'm supposed to be figuring this out on my own. No, you're supposed to be learning how to be honest about your limitations and ask for appropriate support. There's a difference. I listened to this conversation from across the kitchen, marveling at how naturally Emma had stepped into a caretaking role with her father, not enabling his dysfunction but coaching him toward better choices. The change in David was visible but fragile. He called his children every day, not to check up on them or make demands, but to share the small details of his life. He'd started taking evening walks and found a volunteer position at the animal shelter that gave him something to care for besides his own problems. But I could see the strain it was taking on him. Learning to be honest after months of lies was like learning to use a broken bone after it healed. Possible but painful. The real test came when Jake got hurt at baseball practice. I was at the grocery store when my phone rang. Emma's number, but Jake's voice, tight with pain and trying not to cry. Grandma, I broke my wrist. Can you come get me? Coach says I need to go to the hospital. My heart stopped. Where's your father? He's at work. I tried calling, but he's on a job site and doesn't always hear his phone. I'm on my way. Have Coach keep trying your dad. 20 minutes later, I was holding Jake's good hand in the emergency room, while a nurse explained that he'd need surgery to repair the fracture. His wrist was swollen and bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. We'll need to schedule the surgery for tomorrow morning, the doctor explained. He'll be in a cast for 6 to 8 weeks. Then physical therapy. Jake was trying to be brave, but I could see the fear in his eyes. This was his pitching arm, his ticket to a potential college scholarship, maybe his entire future. Will I be able to play baseball again? He asked quietly. With proper healing and rehabilitation? Absolutely, but you'll need to follow the recovery protocol. Exactly. No shortcuts, no trying to come back too early. That's when David burst through the emergency room doors, still in his work clothes, dirt on his boots and panic in his eyes. Where is he? Is he okay? What happened? Jake's face lit up when he saw his father. And I realized how much these children had missed having a parent who showed up when they needed him. "Hey, Dad," Jake said, trying to smile despite the pain medication making him groggy. "I broke my wrist, but the doctor says it'll heal fine." David sank into the chair beside the hospital bed, his face pale with relief and residual terror. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I had my phone in the truck because we were using power tools and I didn't see the calls until Dad." Jake interrupted. "It's okay. Accidents happen. You're here now. But I should have been there. I should have been the one they called first." I watched this exchange with growing understanding. David wasn't just apologizing for missing the phone calls. He was apologizing for the past 6 months for all the ways he'd made his children feel like they couldn't count on him to be there when it mattered. "The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 8, the doctor continued. "Someone will need to stay with him tonight for observation, and he'll need help at home for at least a week." David looked at me uncertainly. "I can stay with him tonight, but I might need help with the home care. I've never dealt with anything like this before." 6 months ago, David would have tried to handle everything himself, probably would have lied about his capabilities rather than admit he needed help. Tonight, he was asking for support before the situation became a crisis. Of course, I said, "We'll figure it out together." The surgery went smoothly, but Jake's recovery was harder than any of us had anticipated. The pain medication made him nauseous. He couldn't shower normally, and simple tasks like getting dressed became major projects. Worse, the orthopedic surgeon had been clear that pushing too hard too early could result in permanent damage to his pitching ability. David surprised everyone by being exactly the kind of parent Jake needed. Patient with the medication schedule, helpful with daily tasks, firm about following medical restrictions even when Jake got frustrated and wanted to do more than he was allowed. "No throwing anything until the doctor clears you," David said when he caught Jake tossing a tennis ball against his bedroom wall 3 weeks after surgery. "It doesn't even hurt anymore," Jake protested. "Hurt isn't the same as healed. Your grandmother and I didn't pay for surgery so you could mess up your arm by being impatient." I noticed that David had started talking about us as a united front, no longer positioning himself as separate from the family structure we'd created. It was a small change but significant. The biggest change came during Jake's follow-up appointment 6 weeks after surgery. "The bone is healing beautifully," the doctor announced, studying the x-rays. "You can start physical therapy next week, and if that goes well, you might be cleared for light throwing by the end of the month." Jake's face broke into the first genuine smile I'd seen since the injury. "Really? I can start getting ready for next season. If you work hard in physical therapy and don't rush the process." "Absolutely." That night, David called a family meeting in our kitchen. Emma, Jake, and I gathered around the table while he stood nervously by the counter, clearly working up the courage to say something important. "I've been thinking," he began, "about the arrangement we made 6 months ago, about proving that I could change, that I could be the kind of father you deserved." Emma and Jake exchanged glances. The 6-month deadline was still 2 weeks away, but we'd all been wondering what would happen when the trial period ended. "I realize now that I can't prove I've changed just by being different for a few months," David continued. "Real change means accepting that I might keep messing up and having systems in place to handle that." "What kind of systems?" Emma asked. "Like not trying to parent you two alone anymore. Like accepting that your grandmother isn't just financial backup. She's family. Like understanding that asking for help isn't weakness. It's wisdom." He sat down at the table with us, no longer standing apart from the group. "What I'm trying to say is that I don't want to go back to the way things were before. Even if you're willing to forgive me. I want us to keep being a family the way we are now, with everyone's voice matching, everyone's needs being considered." Jake leaned forward. "Does that mean you want us to keep living with Grandma?" "I want you to live wherever you feel safest and happiest. If that's with your grandmother, then that's what I want too." Emma stared at her father with an expression I couldn't quite read. "And if we wanted to move back in with you, then I'd want your grandmother to be part of that household, not just a visitor. She's not going to disappear from our lives again, no matter what." The silence that followed was thoughtful rather than tense. These children were weighing their options with the seriousness of adults who'd learned that choices have consequences. "I think," Emma said slowly, "that we're all different people than we were 6 months ago. Maybe we need to figure out what our family looks like now instead of trying to go back to what it used to be." "What does that mean?" David asked. Jake answered. It means maybe we don't go back to the old way. But we don't stay exactly like this either. Maybe we figure out something new. I looked around the table at these three people who'd been torn apart by grief, lies, and desperation, and who'd somehow found their way to this moment of possibility. Whatever we decide, I said, we decide together. No more unilateral decisions. No more secrets. No more throwing away people who love us. David's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry for all of it. We know, Emma said gently. And we forgive you. But Dad, don't mess this up again. This is really your last chance. I won't, he promised. I swear to you I won't. And for the first time in months I believed him. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of our Maple Street house, watching David teach Jake how to make Sarah's famous chocolate chip cookies. Jake's wrist had healed perfectly, stronger than before, and he'd made the varsity baseball team as a junior. But today, he was more interested in getting the cookie dough consistency right than in practicing his pitching. Mom always said the secret was browning the butter first. Emma called from the living room where she was working on college applications. I know, David replied patiently. Your grandmother taught me that last week. The family we'd rebuilt looked nothing like the family we'd lost when Sarah died. But it worked. David had moved into the apartment above Mrs. Chen's restaurant, close enough to be involved in daily life, but far enough away that we all had space to breathe. Emma and Jake split their time between both houses, treating the arrangement as natural as children who'd grown up with divorced parents. More importantly, we'd all learned to talk to each other. Really talk, not just exchange pleasantries or avoid difficult subjects. Have you heard from the admissions office at Northwestern? David asked Emma as he measured vanilla extract. Not yet, but their early decision deadline isn't until next month, so I'm trying not to stress about it. Your mother would be so proud, I said, looking up from the financial documents I was reviewing. She always dreamed of you going to her alma mater. I know, but if I don't get in, there are other options. Great options. I'm not going to base my entire future on one school's decision. The wisdom in that statement reminded me how much Emma had matured over the past year. She'd learned to make backup plans, to value herself independent of other people's approval, to understand that rejection wasn't a reflection of her worth. Jake had learned different lessons. He discovered that asking for help made him stronger, not weaker. That admitting fear or pain or uncertainty didn't make him less of a man. That loving people meant showing up for them consistently, not just when it was convenient. David had learned the hardest lessons of all. That pride was expensive and usually cost more than he could afford. That his children were individuals with their own needs and opinions, not extensions of himself. That family loyalty had to be earned through consistent behavior, not demanded based on blood relationships. As for me, I'd learned that starting over at 67 was not only possible, it was liberating. That money couldn't buy happiness, but it could buy choices. And choices were the foundation of dignity. That throwing away someone who loves you is always a mistake. But sometimes it takes losing them to understand their value. My phone rang, interrupting these reflections. Mr. Harrison's number appeared on the screen. Mrs. Thompson, I hope you don't mind me calling on a Saturday, but I have some news about your estate planning documents. I'd been working with him to establish trusts for Emma and Jake to ensure that Aunt Rose's generosity would benefit multiple generations of our family. What kind of news? I've had an interesting conversation with a representative from the Rose Aberdeen Foundation. It seems your aunt established a charitable foundation years ago, and they're looking for someone to serve on the board of directors. I nearly dropped the phone. I'm sorry, what? The foundation provides financial assistance to families dealing with medical bankruptcies and elder abuse situations. They're specifically interested in having you join the board because of your personal experience with both issues. I looked around my kitchen at David patiently helping Jake measure flour, at Emma sprawled on the living room floor surrounded by scholarship applications, at the life we'd built from the wreckage of David's betrayal and my despair. What would that involve? Reviewing grant applications, making funding decisions, possibly sharing your story at fundraising events. They meet quarterly and the time commitment is manageable. But Mrs. Thompson, the work they do, it's exactly what you've been through. Helping people who've been discarded by family members, supporting medical families who've lost everything, trying to save someone they love. I thought about Aunt Rose, about her letter encouraging me to use the money wisely and help others when I could. This felt like her hand reaching across time, guiding me toward a purpose I hadn't known I was looking for. I'd like to learn more about it, I said. After hanging up, I shared the news with my family. David stopped mixing cookie dough. Jake paused his measurement calculations and Emma looked up from her essays. That sounds perfect for you, Grandma, Emma said immediately. You could help other families avoid what we went through. Or recover from it like we did, Jake added. David was quiet for a moment, then smiled. Sarah would love this. She always said you had more wisdom and strength than you gave yourself credit for. It would mean traveling occasionally, being away from home for board meetings and events. We can handle that, David said confidently. We're a team now. We've got each other covered. 6 months earlier, David wouldn't have been confident about managing anything alone. Now, he was volunteering to hold down the fort while I pursued opportunities that mattered to me. That evening, we had dinner on the front porch, sitting around the outdoor table David had built as a birthday present for Emma. The autumn air was crisp. The leaves were turning colors that reminded me of Sarah's favorite sweater. And the conversation flowed easily between college plans, baseball seasons, work projects, and foundation possibilities. I have an announcement, Emma said as we finished dessert. Northwestern called yesterday. My heart stopped and I got in. Early admission, partial scholarship. The celebration that erupted probably disturbed neighbors 3 blocks away. Jake hooped. David applauded and I immediately started calculating scholarship amounts and remaining costs and dormitory expenses. But Emma continued, raising her hand for silence. I'm not sure I want to go. The cheering stopped abruptly. What do you mean? David asked carefully. I mean, Northwestern was Mom's dream for me. Not necessarily my dream for myself. And after everything we've been through this year, after seeing how family can fall apart and come back together, I'm not sure I want to be 8 hours away from you all. The maturity in this statement took my breath away. Emma was turning down a prestigious university, not because she was afraid of leaving home, but because she'd learned to value the relationships that had sustained her through crisis. Sweetheart, I said gently, your mother wanted you to go to Northwestern because she believed in your potential, not because she wanted to control your choices. If there's somewhere else you'd rather be, somewhere that feels right for who you are now, then that's what you should choose. Actually, she said, smiling, there is somewhere else. University of Chicago offered me a full scholarship to study social work. They have a program that focuses on family crisis intervention and financial counseling for medical families. The silence that followed was profound. Emma had chosen a career path that would let her help other families navigate the kind of crisis we'd survived. She'd turned Aunt Rose's gift and our family's trauma into a calling that could benefit countless other people. That's perfect, Jake said quietly. Mom would be so proud. We're all proud, David added. You're going to change lives. As we sat there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the security of home and the promise of Emma's future service to others, I felt Sarah's presence as clearly as if she were sitting at the table with us. She'd worried about leaving her children too early, about not having enough time to teach them everything they needed to know. But somehow through crisis and betrayal and the test of whether love could survive loss, her children had learned the most important lessons of all. That family means showing up. That integrity matters more than convenience. That helping others heal can help you heal too. That sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the chance to prove they're better than their worst decisions. So I said, raising my coffee cup. Here's to Aunt Rose, who believed in evening the score. To Mom, Emma added, who protected us even when she couldn't stay to raise us to second chances, David said quietly. And the people who offer them when you don't deserve them. To family, Jake concluded. The kind you choose and fight for and rebuild when it breaks. We sat there on the porch of the house that Aunt Rose's gift had bought, surrounded by the love that Sarah's wisdom had protected, living the life that forgiveness had made possible. And for the first time since my daughter died, I felt complete. The universe, it turned out, did have a sense of justice. After all, you just had to be patient enough to let it unfold. As I looked around the table at these 3 people who traveled with me from betrayal to redemption, I realized that David had been wrong about one thing in the lawyer's office that day. I hadn't enjoyed being homeless, but I was certainly enjoying being home. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.